Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Maryland native. I'm excited to be included in this, even though I now live right across the state line in Pennsylvania. And today I'm going to be presenting to you on mosquitoes and whether they are more than monsters. So I want to go into a little bit of my experience with mosquitoes before we get started. So I did my master's degree at University of Maryland on West Nile virus in Chicago. Unfortunately, I never got to visit Chicago, but I got a lot of mosquitoes from there, and I ground them up, figured out which species they were, and tested them for West Nile virus. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of intense lab work, but I had a good time doing it. And there's me posing in front of that. And nowadays, since I graduated back in May, I started working up in Pennsylvania as a public health specialist. And I'm seeking out mosquitoes. I'm treating really problem areas and sending those mosquitoes to be tested for different diseases. I'm catching them as larvae, I'm catching them as adults. This bottom picture is I'm wading through a swamp. My boss took this photo. He was making me really nervous. He had his phone out. He's also standing in the swamp. He had his phone out. I'm really worried he's going to drop it. We're never going to see it again. Uh, but we were spraying larvicides there to kill mosquito larvae, which are living in the water. And that was perhaps the most number of mosquitoes I've ever seen in a place. They were just constantly going for us. But when I turned on this blower, they all fled, which was nice. On the right here, you can't really see it, but I'm holding a dipper absolutely full, hundreds of mosquito larvae. This on the right side of me, that's an abandoned above ground pool, which is absolutely full of mosquitoes. And we were wondering where all the mosquitoes in the neighborhood were coming from. And that was a pretty good place to look from. Alrighty, so this presentation is going to be structured. I'm going to be talking about the good that mosquitoes do, the bad that mosquitoes do, and the interesting little facts about mosquitoes, because I feel even among entomologists that mosquitoes are kind of unappreciated for the interesting things they do besides spread disease or interesting ways they spread disease. At the end, I'm going to go through a little bit about how you can protect yourself from mosquitoes and how to keep yourself safe from their biting and their pestering. Alrighty. So what is a mosquito? Well, mosquitoes are flies. They're related to midges and no-see-ums, also called biting midges. They all grow up in water as larvae, and adult females typically feed on blood. Both sexes feed on nectar as their primary energy source. That's what's keeping them moving around. The females are feeding on blood to provide nutrients to produce their eggs. And life as an egg can really vary for mosquitoes. House mosquitoes are typically born in a raft formation. The female sticks them all together and they kind of drop out into their water. Tiger mosquitoes, these are the really annoying black and white striped mosquito species you can find very commonly in Maryland. They're laid right above the water line so that when water rises, a good sign that things are going to stay wet for a little bit. They can emerge out of dormancy and go about their little lives. Malaria mosquito eggs have these cute little, or at least I think they're cute little floaties, these air-filled pockets on the side of them, so they float on the surface of the water. And then there are floodwater mosquitoes, and floodwater mosquitoes find damp soil and they lay eggs in there. And these eggs can stay dormant for many years. We're actually not sure how many years, but it's a lot, or it's a few at least. And basically, over time, what ends up happening in an area that doesn't flood very often is that these mosquito eggs build up. So when there eventually is a flood, you can get like many millions to billions of mosquitoes all emerging at once. Where do mosquitoes live as larvae? They live a huge diversity of places, anywhere that there's water for like 9 to 10 days to a couple weeks and it's not drying out. They're pretty happy. I often see them in these four places in abandoned tires. These shelter mosquitoes really well. They keep the sun off of them. They hold water really well. They hold leaves and other nutrients really well. These things are my enemy. Abandoned tires. I can't stand them. Even looking at this photo, it makes me want to just, I don't know, dump them all out. Stormwater infrastructure can harbor a lot of mosquitoes. This is where we see them a lot in our urban and suburban areas. Um, when this infrastructure, in an attempt to slow stormwater down, can hold on to water for a while. And a lot of our West Nile virus spreading mosquito species can hang out in these, and we have special tools to get in and under them and pull out mosquitoes. And basically, I took somewhere like a couple hundred dips into stormwater, like catch basins and stuff this summer. I think only two of them didn't have mosquitoes. So these are really good at holding mosquitoes. Holes in trees. There are a lot of holes in tree mosquitoes that specialize in living in tree holes. They can spread some diseases. And then just general, any sort of woodland pool. If you've got a trench from a car tire in the mud that holds water, that can be a great place for mosquitoes too. So a real diversity of habitats we see in the common mosquito species that we're targeting. But what are they doing in these bodies of water? Well, mosquito larvae are filter feeders typically, and they have these little cephalic fans, fans attached to their head, and they're kind of brushing floating microbes and stuff into their mouths, or they can also swim to the bottom and graze on algae. They're feeding on microbes, they're feeding on algae, they're feeding on bacteria, all good stuff. But these mosquito larvae, they don't have gills. They have to breathe through the surface. And the way they do that is through this, what I've called a snorkel here. The actual term is siphon. And they breathe through the surface of the water, and their little hairs ringing this siphon that keep the water from getting in. I mentioned roommates here. Mosquitoes are rarely ever alone in their little pockets of water, and they can compete with each other in a big way when it comes to food. There's only so much food in these little bits of water, and mosquito populations really reflect competitive ability. So it's in, they're competing with each other for limited food resources, and some of them are better at specializing in different types of food, and some of them are better eaters. Longer, slower development times. It's all very complex and interesting. I threw this in as a fun fact. Some mosquitoes actually kind of shift away from this lifestyle and do things a little bit differently. So mosquitoes in the groups Mansonia and Coquiletidia, their siphons have become sharpened, or they've evolved to be sharpened, and they jam these into underwater plant stems, plant roots, and breathe oxygen through the plants. And therefore they're not swimming around. They're just kind of hanging out. And these are really hard to catch because they're deep in the water and can be really hard to find. What do mosquitoes do as adults? Well, most female mosquito species feed on blood. This is a female woodland pool mosquito, very common in Maryland, one of the earlier emerging mosquito species in Maryland. And they're feeding on blood for nutrients to produce their young. Both sexes are feeding on nectar, sap, rotting fruit. Every year when I set up pumpkins on my front door and they start to rot, you'll start to see some really late season mosquitoes, if it's kind of warm out, feeding on those rotting pumpkins. This is a male yellow fever mosquito. They're really just there to mate with females, and they drink nectar and can be kind of accidental pollinators. When female mosquitoes take blood meals, they need a lot of time to digest it. I really like this photo. These are two common malaria mosquitoes. This is in Maryland on the Eastern Shore, if you're familiar with Blackwater Refuge. And this is on the right, we have a female that's taken a blood meal fairly recently. And on the left, we have one that's taken a blood meal a little bit later. She's starting to develop eggs and get ready to start producing eggs. And then how do mosquitoes survive the winter? It kind of depends on the mosquito species, but a bunch of mosquito species survive the winter as adults. And the way they do this, they find a sheltered place somewhere where it's not going to get too windy, too cold, too exposed, and they hang out there. Some mosquitoes make their way into basements, abandoned sheds, barns. This is a mosquito I found under the eave of my house in College Park in late November when it was pretty chilly out, and she was hanging out. And this is the common name for the species. I don't know why they're called this erratic mosquito. I don't know why. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the good that mosquitoes do. So mosquitoes can actually be really important pollinators. This is a species called Aedes communis. It's a woodland snow pool mosquito. This is a species that emerges really early in the spring, even before it's spring sometimes. There can still be snow on the ground when these mosquitoes are emerging. They just need to be air temperature to be warm enough for them to fly around. And because they emerge so early and they're living in these really wet and cold habitats where bees can't really get started as early in the year, mosquitoes can be a really important pollinator for certain specialized plants, including this one, the leaved bog orchid, although I think its common name, it might also be blunt leaved rain orchid. Um, and this is a species that is pollinated a lot by Aedes communis, Aedes canadensis. That's the woodland pool mosquito I showed you earlier. So these really early season mosquitoes have some direct importance on the lives of a lot of bog orchids. And this is true really outside of the United States too. Bog orchids and a lot of specialized bog plants are pollinated quite a lot by mosquitoes. This is a figure from a really recent paper, 2025. On the top of this figure, we have groups of mosquitoes, and then on the bottom, we have groups of plants. I'm not going to pretend to know plants very well, but basically, there are a lot of connections. And this is even really mosquitoes as pollinators is a really kind of understudied field. There are only really a few people. I think I can only name off the top of my head two people who do any mosquito pollination work. So this is just from kind of these might be from incidental or kind of unfocused observations. There's still so much we don't know about the importance of mosquitoes as pollinators. They're not really great pollinators generally. They're not hairy enough. They don't spend enough time digging around the flower like bees do. They can't do buzz pollination like bumblebees, but they're definitely transporting pollen grains. Um, so that is one way that they're important to plant life. Mosquito larvae are also a source of nutrition for a lot of different organisms, whether that be like other aquatic invertebrates like back swimmers, water boatmen, damselflies, dragonflies, predatory diving beetles. These all eat mosquitoes in large numbers. As adults, they're fed on by all sorts of birds, including purple martins. And then some of them are even eaten as plants. As larvae, mosquitoes are eaten by bladderworts, which are an aquatic carnivorous plant. And there's even a paper out there that asked what would happen if we just introduced bladderworts to mosquito habitats in cities? Would that be a good way to control them? Um, and then this can be even really specialized. There's a jumping spider in Africa around Lake Victoria called the vampire spider, and it's so called because it specializes on feeding on blood-filled mosquitoes. So it grabs them off of other animals or off of foliage where they're resting. So this jumping spider indirectly is getting all sorts of good nutrients out of blood and the mosquito. So kind of a double deal, a good deal for that spider. And then this is a bit of a different perspective from the ones that we kind of normally talk about as humans affected by diseases, but diseases are really important for ecosystem function. I think about, the classic ecology example of, wolves are feeding more on sick and injured prey items. And so these diseases are important for in many hidden ways that we can't always see, that they're shaping ecosystems and interactions between predators and prey. They're parasites that influence prey behavior, and these are all ways that diseases, parasites, viruses, they all play an important ecosystem role. So it's important to consider them. And I've thrown up a few diverse parasites, pathogens, viruses that mosquitoes spread. Dog heartworm, West Nile virus, lacrosse, plasmodium, which is malaria. And then I thought this was a really interesting one. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but down in Central and South America, I guess more South America, there's a species of fly that is called the human botfly, and its larvae, and this is a little bit morbid and a little gross. They dig into human flesh and they eat human flesh. But what's interesting is that these flies take advantage of mosquitoes. They grab mosquitoes and they lay eggs on them. And then when the mosquito goes to bite a human, those eggs come off and hatch as larvae. And then they bite and eat into the human. So mosquitoes are really, for the human botfly, mosquitoes are essential and they're really good for that species' continued existence. But of course, diseases are really terrible. And mosquito-borne diseases cause a lot of pain and suffering, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit in this section, the bad. This one is probably going to be more familiar to everyone. So a bunch of you may have heard this question before. A lot of mosquito biologists like to start their presentations off with it. And the question is, what is the deadliest animal in the world? And this being a mosquito presentation, you should probably be able to guess the answer. So mosquitoes are considered the most dangerous animal in the world to people. They kill the most number of people out of all animals. But I look at this and I see, mosquitoes kill a lot of people a year, but it's not all applied fairly. There are so many species of mosquitoes that don't really cause human disease. It's by far the majority of them. So I sometimes feel like this chart is a little bit unfair, but also it's definitely unfair to mosquitoes because mosquitoes are being counted as spreading diseases to humans, but the human bubble doesn't count humans spreading diseases to other humans. There's no mention of any sort of respiratory or foodborne illness or anything within the human bubble. This is just direct violence. So I feel like it's a little bit unfair. I feel like the better way to phrase that is that mosquitoes are the most dangerous non-human animal to humans. But that's just my soapbox. And I want to emphasize, there are a ton of mosquito species, and they're all some of them are getting painted unfairly by this broad brush as the most dangerous animal in the world. So numbers really vary widely. Um, but in a recent book, there was a claim that there are about 3,500 mosquito species. And I've also seen estimates of closer to 4,000, 3,700. So it can really vary. There are a lot of mosquito species, and we'll get into it a little bit. Sometimes the species differences, designations, which mosquito is which species, are two mosquito species the same species? It can get really complicated. So basically, there are a lot of mosquito species. But how many of these 3,500 or so mosquito species, how many spread disease to us? Well, it's actually a really low number. As of 2022, in this big study done by Donald Yee, there are only about 88 known mosquito species that transmit diseases to humans, and another 243 that are potential spreaders or likely spreaders. So, visualized in a pie chart, this is a really small amount of mosquitoes that are involved in human transmitting diseases to humans. And I just want to highlight one of these mosquitoes coming from this white section that's not involved with spreading diseases to humans. This is a mosquito that you can find in Maryland called the ornate treehole mosquito. And this is a mosquito that's never been recorded feeding on humans. They're exclusively bird feeders. So this is a mosquito that would have likely no interaction with a human, and it's getting labeled under this big broad brush. And then even within the 88 species of mosquito known to spread disease to us, some species play way more of a role in transmitting diseases to us than others. I've highlighted 4 here that are kind of responsible for, you could argue, the lion's share of disease transmission to us. So out of all these mosquito species, very few of them are causing most of the issues. So our first one is malaria, really terrible set of disease causing parasites. And one of the main vectors, one of the main mosquito species spreading malaria is a species known as Anopheles gambiae, or the African malaria mosquito. Then there are the diseases chikungunya, dengue, yellow fever, Zika, and these all can be spread by the yellow fever mosquito. Great name. You can find this in the southern US, and it's actually making its way through Maryland a little bit right now. It's been living in DC for a long time, but people are starting to find it in Baltimore. Although we don't worry about chikungunya and dengue being locally transmitted in Maryland. They're travel cases, but we don't worry about that. And then spreading chikungunya, dengue, and Zika, the tiger mosquito, although these in Maryland are mostly just annoying, they're not really spreading disease. These are very common. You can find these in your backyard. They'll bite you during the daytime, which is rare compared to other mosquitoes. They love biting around the ankles. And then my mosquito study species and target species of choice, the northern and southern house mosquito, these spread West Nile virus and in other parts of the world, lymphatic filariasis. So out of all these mosquitoes, just a couple handfuls or so are really responsible for the majority of disease transmission, which feels a little unfair. But diseases, we do have to deal with diseases, and these mosquito species can be really common in the United States. So the northern southern house mosquito, and then in the west, the western encephalitis mosquito are largely responsible for the transmission of West Nile virus in the United States. And this is a map of CDC data of where human West Nile virus cases have occurred on a county level in the United States. So you see Maryland, there's a good amount, Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, where I live, good amount. And then the West is really crazy with West Nile virus, largely thanks to this species. But in the northeastern and southern areas, this species is playing the big role in transmitting West Nile virus. But enough about diseases. Mosquitoes can be really annoying even without diseases. So, woodland malaria mosquitoes, very common in Maryland. Floodwater mosquitoes, very common in Maryland. Tiger mosquitoes, all three of these are very common in Maryland. And they're all really annoying, and they can all be around in big numbers, biting people. And then this is just an example of a crazy, crazy thing that I saw on social media a little bit ago. This is a black salt marsh mosquito. This is actually a picture of one biting me on the eastern shore. They're not that common in Maryland, but where they are really common is southern Florida. This is an image of a giant pile of mosquitoes. I think it's over 1 million mosquitoes estimated from mosquito traps set on Sanibel Island, Florida. And these mosquitoes, black salt marsh mosquitoes, are extraordinarily common down there. And this is just a crazy amount to me. Look at this giant pile. It was like stacked at the top of a Home Depot 5-gallon bucket. Truly incredible how many mosquitoes can emerge if left unchecked. But mosquito diseases are really bad, not just for us, but for wildlife. This is the image I used on the structure slide where I was showing how this talk was going to be going. These are all Hawaiian endemic birds, honey creepers, and such. They are largely endangered or critically endangered in some cases, and they're really threatened by diseases spread by introduced mosquitoes, those house mosquitoes I was just talking about that spread West Nile virus. But in Hawaii, they're spreading avian malaria, and this is really having a big effect on these birds. They're getting forced to higher and higher altitudes where the mosquitoes can't really follow as well. So their ranges are shrinking even further beyond just the shrinkings they're already going through. And then West Nile virus. When West Nile virus first showed up in the United States, it killed off a huge number of birds, and it still kills off a good number of birds. But in the beginning, there were so many reports of dead crows, killed by West Nile virus. For some reason, the family Corvidae, which contains crows and blue jays, is really hit hard by West Nile virus when some other birds, like chickens, are largely fine, or don't show symptoms at all. Crows and ravens and blue jays are really hard hit. And actually, up until pretty recently, the program I worked for would collect dead birds and send them to get tested, but it's been deemed too risky because of avian influenza, so we haven't been doing that. And then dog heartworms. Dog heartworms are can be transmitted by mosquitoes, and those are really bad too. Those heartworms. Mosquitoes can harm livestock too. Every year we have cases of West Nile virus and other diseases in horses. West Nile virus, if horses are unvaccinated, can have like a 30% mortality rate, killing 30% of horses infected. Um, and triple E, Eastern equine encephalitis, is very bad for horses too, and that's also a bad disease that we have to worry about sometimes. This on the right is a mosquito species known as the dark ricefield mosquito. And this species can emerge in huge, huge numbers after hurricanes. And there are reports that such huge clouds of these emerged in Louisiana after a hurricane in 2020 that some livestock, so much blood was drank that so many mosquitoes fed on their blood that they passed because of how many mosquitoes fed on their blood. That was reported in this paper down here. So it can be really bad for livestock. But I want to take a break from the doom and gloom and talk about some fun, interesting stuff that mosquitoes do. And I'm going to start off with one uh, that I find very interesting, and that is the pitcher plant mosquito. Now, this is a mosquito species that kind of defies convention. It lives in pitcher plants. Pitcher plants are trying to consume, these are carnivorous plants. They're trying to consume mosquitoes and other insects, but somehow this mosquito makes its life in pitcher plants. And their larvae are specially adapted to survive in the acidic digestive fluids of the pitcher, and they're actually kind of stealing. They're stealing dead and dying insects that the plant would normally be eating. So they're kind of like a little parasite. Very interesting species right there. And then also talking about specialized habitats, on the left we have a mosquito species, Aedes togoi, and on the western coast of the United States, this is a species that lives in these extremely salty pools of water next to the ocean, where ocean spray splashes up and deposits salt. These mosquitoes can survive in water that is saltier than seawater. How crazy is that? This is a freshwater. Well, almost all insects are freshwater based, but this is a saltwater tolerant mosquito. How incredible is that? And then on the right, we have a crab hole mosquito. And as the name would suggest, these live only in crab holes of terrestrial crabs down in the Caribbean. These are land crabs that dig burrows into moist soil and the bottoms kind of fill up with water. And these mosquitoes only live in those crab holes. They can't live anywhere else. Then I've talked about mosquitoes eating algae and microbes and bacteria. I haven't talked about mosquitoes eating other mosquitoes yet. There's a species, you can find it in Maryland, called the elephant mosquito. And as a larva, this mosquito eats other mosquitoes. And this is actually, so this is a picture of it as a larva. It's going to get way, way bigger. And it's eating all other mosquitoes. And it's very good at it. And I'll show you some videos of that in a second. But because it eats so much protein and gets so much nutrients from these other mosquitoes, it can grow up to be truly huge. This is the largest mosquito in the United States. And here's it compared to one of the smallest, Aedes albopictus, the tiger mosquito. This is the really annoying one that we all have to deal with. So what's interesting about this mosquito is you notice its proboscis, where we normally feed on blood, is curved. That's where it kind of gets the name elephant mosquito. And it can be curved because it doesn't need to feed on blood. It gets enough nutrition as a larva that that as an adult, they don't feed on blood at all. They just fly around to flowers and look for mosquito habitat to lay their eggs in. And they'll actually lay their eggs in tires and start eating tiger mosquitoes in there. Very cool. We catch them occasionally in our traps because they're looking to lay eggs in mosquito habitats. So they're getting attracted by those same trap baits as well. And then I want to show you some videos of some mosquitoes eating other mosquitoes. This must have been a really fun experiment to do. This is a different mosquito species called Gallinipper, and they're a really large mosquito that still feeds on blood. And look at that, it shoots its head forward. Is everyone seeing that? It shoots its head forward and it grabs a Aedes mosquito. Oh my gosh, that was crazy. And then here is the elephant mosquito. And it grabs it. And then there are other mosquito species that use their tail like a kind of like like not really a grabber, but it kind of they push other mosquitoes towards their face using their tail. Really incredible stuff, at least to me. Maybe I'm biased, but. And then I want to come back to our slide of our really bad mosquitoes, our most wanted mosquitoes. Even these species, they're the ones that spread a lot of disease to us, but they're also interesting in their own rights. And I feel like I want to cover some of that just so they're not known only as the mosquitoes that spread disease to us. So I referred to African malaria mosquito as a species. This is totally wrong. The African malaria mosquito is like at least 8 species unto itself. And these species are all different in terms of how they spread malaria, whether they spread malaria, where they live, what they eat, all sorts of stuff. And what makes this tricky is they all look basically identical, but they're considered different species. So how much of malaria variation, the difficulty of predicting malaria can be attributed to all the complex ways that these species differ over the landscape and how they differ over transmission. It's really cool that there's so much going on with what we would sometimes even consider one species. Then there's the yellow fever mosquito. This is a really interesting one because the yellow fever mosquito really is good at finding and biting humans. It prefers to feed on human blood. It can live around in and around homes. It's really just a hugely successful, maybe one of the most successful invasive species on Earth, but it didn't used to always be that way. Originally, it was a tree hole dweller that lived in the woods and fed on wildlife. It didn't really feed on humans. And that's this black one here. But some time ago, I don't know the time scale, this species split and now has two forms. These are the same species of mosquito. The black one lives in tree holes and feeds only on wildlife, kind of ignores humans. And then this brownish gold one on the right here, this is the one we're familiar with. Something changed and it evolved to really be able to live in human habitations and feed preferentially on humans. And this species went from the little forest in Africa where it was and exploded. Now you can find it all over the world: Hawaii, southwestern US, southeastern US. It's the most studied mosquito in the world because of its role in spreading yellow fever. And it wasn't always this way. I find that very interesting. And then the tiger mosquito, this is a really annoying one that we all deal with. Really small, stripy. You see them a lot in Baltimore City. They are super good at outcompeting other mosquitoes as larvae. They are really the best. There are few other mosquitoes that can beat them. They eat super fast. They can eat a huge variety of different food sources, and they're really incredible competitors. And sometimes where you find them, you don't find other mosquito species because they're just so good at eating everything up. And people in the 1970s, scientists tried to weaponize this. They wanted to use these tiger mosquitoes to outcompete a different mosquito species that was spreading a virus to people in these southern Pacific atolls. And so they introduced tiger mosquitoes to these atolls. They figured that in 2 years, these tiger mosquitoes would outcompete and eliminate this other species of mosquito. Unfortunately, it did not work. This is kind of a dangerous idea, introducing a super invasive tiger mosquito to a new place, but they did it. And unfortunately for their experiment, and fortunately for everyone who's lived on those islands, it was just too hot and too dry for these mosquitoes. But it was interesting. They were trying to use these mosquitoes as a biocontrol. And then the final of the four mosquito species I talked about, the house mosquito, the mosquito that I studied for my graduate degree, they actually have also split into two different forms: the above ground form and the below ground form, with very different behaviors. The above ground form lives above ground. It prefers to feed on birds. It drinks blood it has to drink blood to produce eggs, and they go dormant in the winter. The below ground, and this is a reference to where it was found, it was actually known for a while as the London Underground mosquito because it was first described from the London Underground train system. Because during World War II, when Londoners were sheltering from the Blitz, they were getting bitten by mosquitoes underground, something that probably shouldn't happen, but they were. And they found out that it's this distinct ecotype, as it's called, from the above ground form. And this species can mate underground, which is weird. They love biting humans, unlike their above ground counterparts. They can lay eggs without a blood meal, so they can just keep going down there, and they're active year round. And what's interesting is that these are still the same species. If they come into contact with each other, usually what happens is that one of the below ground ones comes up through some basement or faucet or something, sewer infrastructure. These two can produce a hybrid, which is better at transmitting West Nile virus than either of the parent types. And so the question is whether hybrids or the mix of these different ecotypes, what role that has on West Nile virus. And it's a question that the lab I was working for is interested in looking at. But there's just so much complexity going on with what is often thought of as like a really boring mosquito. It's not very interesting visually. It kind of is very commonplace, but I just find them fascinating. And then mosquitoes, they love body heat. They're attracted to body heat. But there are certain mosquitoes that go after cold-blooded organisms. These are mosquitoes in Florida feeding on worms. And you have mosquitoes feeding on box turtles. This is a species, Aedes canadensis, loves box turtles to a huge degree. You have frog biting mosquitoes. Really incredible. And then I just wanted to shout out this photographer, Larry Reeves. He took this photo, and to do this, he had to crawl around in a river in Florida at night. And ominously, this river is named, its actual name is the River Styx, like out of Greek myth. I would not be there at night, but he is, and it's good that he was because he discovered that these mosquitoes are feeding on worms. How crazy is that? No one knew that they were doing that before. And this is a recent discovery. And then I've shown a lot of pictures of kind of more kind of bland looking mosquitoes, but mosquitoes can be truly beautiful. This is a photo. This is an internationally award-winning shot by Gil Wizen, and he took this photo of what's called a Sabbathese mosquito, and it's feeding on him. And this is a female, absolutely beautiful. Got these crazy leg combs. We're not sure what they're for, but mosquitoes can be really beautiful too. And with that, being conscious of time, we're going to go talking about outreach. How can we keep ourselves safe from mosquitoes? And one of the biggest tips that I give people when they're getting bitten by mosquitoes is look around you. A lot of mosquito species, there are some that can fly really far, but some of the worst mosquitoes that bite us, including tiger mosquitoes, try to stay as local as possible. They don't like moving very far. They're very weak flyers and very vulnerable. So tiger mosquitoes will often stay within like 100 to 300 feet of where they're born. And what this means is that if you're getting really tormented by mosquitoes, it's worth taking a look around to see if there's standing water somewhere that could be harboring them. So I've seen mosquito larvae in open trash bins that are left open to the rain and allowed to fill up over a couple weeks, rain gutters, fountains, water bowls, anywhere that's low, there's like a trench, toys, neglected pools, that's a huge one. Those are the worst. Tires, terrible. All of these places are places to look for mosquitoes. And when you find a object that's holding a lot of mosquito larvae, what you can do is just dump it out and make sure it's not holding water, or drill holes if possible, just so mosquito larvae can't hang out in there. These are examples of pools. This is a picture of a pool someone took in California. Terrible, terrible. This is a picture of a pool I saw in Pennsylvania. Um, Awful, filled with mosquitoes. Not good. Um, and then this image, this makes me, I can't stand this, but a Maryland man was sentenced to 45 days for illegally dumping more than 250,000 scrap tires, and that's what they look like, all collected in one place. This is, I think, in one of the counties near West Virginia. I can't remember which county, but this could hold. I can't even imagine how many mosquitoes this could hold. This is truly, truly terrible. And they're hard to treat too. They're really hard to get inside of and treat with larvicide to kill mosquitoes. So remove standing water, remove tires, keep mosquitoes out of your home. You can make sure windows don't have tears in them. Um, Avoid going out at dusk and dawn. While tiger mosquitoes will bite you any time of day, most mosquitoes are really feeding at dusk and dawn when it's a little bit cooler. Make sure that doors aren't too much there's not too much of a gap between the door and the step where mosquitoes could just fly in. Wearing long sleeved and baggy clothing to keep mosquitoes off of your skin is really important. But what do you do when long sleeves can't protect you? Now, these aren't mosquitoes in this image, but this is a good example. These are biting flies in Australia. What do you do when there's just so many mosquitoes, you can't keep them really off of your skin? Well, then it's time to break out the chemicals. And it's really important to use EPA approved repellents because they've been tested for safety and there's really good information on how to use them correctly. DEET is a synthetic repellent. This is likely the most effective mosquito repellent ever. And this is an example down here. You have a hand sprayed with DEET and a hand left untreated. And while there are a few mosquitoes around this hand, I'd rather have this hand than this hand. Um, DEET actually works in a really interesting way. I'm going to not try to get off on tangent on this, but it basically masks your smell. It's like, I've heard it described as an invisibility cloak. It suppresses the lactic acid coming off of us that mosquitoes are smelling. And they also just like the smell of it. And they like it hurts them if they land on it. So it's kind of like it's like an invisibility cloak covered in thorns. Like, so mosquitoes really don't do well when you have DEET on. But there are also other options. DEET can be kind of have a gross texture and it can damage plastic, like watches if they're made of plastic. So there's icaridin and picaridin. That's kind of one that's similar to a component in black pepper. Oil of lemon eucalyptus. This is less effective than DEET in that you need to reapply it more frequently, but it's an option if you're interested in that. And then there are also contact insecticides you can treat fabric with. This is not one you'd spray on yourself. And especially with all of these, it's really important to follow the label to the letter. In pest control, the motto is the label is the law. So you always have to make sure you read the label of your bug sprays and all sorts of stuff to make sure you're using them correctly. And then how do we kill mosquitoes, or how do homeowners kill mosquitoes? So this is an example of a product. I'm not endorsing this product, but this is an example of a product called a mosquito dunk you can pick up at your local hardware store. And these contain a crystal protein of a soil bacterium called BTI, Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis. And they kill these dunks will only kill fly larvae. So other insects could even consume it and they'd be fine. But it only kills fly larvae, mosquitoes being flies. It kills them quite effectively. When we use similar stuff, we don't use this exactly. But in places that can't be drained, it can't be dumped out, like a little fish pond or a bird bath, these can be really good. And then I want to wrap up this presentation. I want to leave you three messages. One being there are thousands of species of mosquito that do not bother us. Mosquitoes, even those that can harm us, are worth learning about, even if it's just to better fight them. And there are many inexpensive, environmentally friendly ways to protect yourself from mosquitoes, but certain chemical products used responsibly can be tremendously helpful. So those are my three take-home messages. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Ben, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. We can unshare. Thank you. And I'll put a spotlight on you. And we'll open it up for Q&A. If you want to put a question in the chat box, you can, or raise your hand and I can call on you to ask. We do have some questions already in here. But Patricia asked, do horses or birds have something to do with the concentration areas of West Nile? So if there's an area that has a lot of horses or specific birds, are you likely to have more West Nile virus there?
That's a really great question. The map that I showed was human cases of West Nile virus. When it comes to horses, fortunately, there's a vaccine for them that will keep them safe. There's no vaccine for us. There's apparently a bird vaccine out there, but it's harder to vaccinate birds than it is horses. So that's a really good question about where horse horse cases of West Nile virus take place. It's basically where horses are unvaccinated. So we get them in further in like kind of the center of Pennsylvania, where there's more of the plain community that don't vaccinate their horses as much. But they've actually been very good about vaccinations of horses are up. So there have been fewer horse cases than usual of West Nile virus lately.
Following on that question, do the mosquitoes that interact with birds, or mostly on birds, do they target specific birds, or is it just any bird?
Yes, that's a really great question. And I do not know much about birds, but I read this very long paper and presented on it in grad school about how birds are targeted. And I guess I can give the example it turns out that robins are really great at hosting West Nile virus and they spread it to a lot of mosquitoes. It does not have a huge effect on them. And one study estimated that in Chicago, 40% of West Nile virus transmission paths from birds to mosquitoes were from robins. So robins are getting fed on a huge amount by mosquitoes, and I guess they don't really fight back or kick them off, and they don't really develop symptoms, and they appear to be really good carriers for West Nile virus. One of the theories about how West Nile virus was distributed and how it worked was that the idea was that when robins migrate, the mosquitoes turn to bite humans, and that's where West Nile virus comes from in terms of the season. That hasn't been supported in further studies, but it was an interesting one. Robins are really thought to be hugely important to West Nile virus transmission.
Interesting. Mark has a few questions. What is the evolutionary history? Maybe you know, when did mosquitoes first show up?
That is a really good question. I do not know, but I know that been a recent paper that has suggested that originally male mosquitoes also fed on blood. Um, but yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know when. Also, I forgot to mention that I have a mosquito on me, plush of a mosquito. If you've I feel like this is as good a qualification as my master's degree because who else would own a mosquito plush but someone who really loves talking about mosquitoes.
That's
But
awesome. Well, we'll
yeah,
have to, Mark, I'll find somebody who could maybe do a paleo talk on mosquitoes. That would be interesting for our fossil club also.
there's
But here's,
apparently a big book on what fed on the dinosaurs, and it covers all the biting midges, the mosquitoes. I think it's called like What Bugged the Dinosaurs. I haven't read it. I don't know what it talks about, but apparently it's like the source for all that sort of stuff. If you're interested in looking into that,
well, they were at least around when the dinosaurs were there because that's where we got Jurassic Park from.
absolutely.
How many eggs do females typically lay, and what is the average lifespan of mosquitoes?
That's a really good question, and unfortunately, I'm going to answer it in an annoying sciencey way and say it depends. Some mosquitoes lay huge numbers of eggs at once, like those Culex house mosquitoes that lay them in rafts. Others kind of deposit them one at a time. Mosquito females mate only once, and then they lay eggs throughout the remainder of their season, typically. So they can lay a lot of eggs over a whole season, but how many, I do not know. And then uh, how long do they live? That also really depends. Mosquitoes can be fairly long lived and live throughout the summer. I know that there's only one generation of woodland pool mosquitoes per year, and they just kind of survive and straggle on throughout the summer. So they can live a pretty long time. And then also mosquitoes survive the winter. So that's plenty of months. A bunch of the malaria mosquitoes in the United States survive throughout the winter as adults. So they have to be able to live a while. And then also some mosquitoes survive through the winter as larvae. So it might even take longer if they're living in a really cold area. It might take over a year. I don't know, but yeah.
I've heard that they can be in diapause for over 2 years.
Mm, that would be crazy.
Uh, Preston, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. It's actually Preston's dad. Great talk. Thank you very much. I had heard a few years back that they had potentially a way of genetically modifying, I guess, large numbers of mosquitoes where their offspring would be infertile, and that they thought that there was a possibility that if they released them, that it could eliminate like entire mosquito populations. And I wanted to know if that was a real thing, and also why not?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I actually made a bonus slide about it, but it's really just images, so I can talk about it. But basically, yeah, there's a company called Oxitec, and they made a line of mosquitoes called the Friendly Mosquito. And basically, there are all sorts of different strategies for trying to accomplish stuff like this, like sometimes just irradiating mosquitoes so that they can't um, produce offspring. There's a tool called Gene Drive, which is pretty complicated, which basically ensures that only males will be born and males don't bite. So they just keep mating along, and then you just get more and more males. And eventually the idea is that these males with the gene drive kind of take over and no females are being born and the population dies out. That's just one of there are lots of different companies trying this right now. I think Google even has their own attempt going on to try to figure, which is interesting. Um, but this technology has had, uh, I think it's been successful in some trials in Brazil and I want to say Florida. But the difficulty of this is you need to make sure that these genetically modified mosquitoes are able to compete with wild ones. They're as fit as their wild counterparts. And sometimes that's not the case, and it's kind of held some of these projects back. And then why not? So I would argue we should for a lot of these problem mosquito species, those four I kind of named, among others. Uh, all the three of them that live in the United States, the yellow fever mosquito, the house mosquitoes, and the tiger mosquito, these are all invasive in the United States. They were all introduced. If we eliminated them in the United States, it would not have, and they're all introduced pretty recently, besides, I guess, the house mosquitoes and the yellow fever mosquitoes, which were introduced um, actually as part of it's like in the early colonial days. For example, we have a really bad invasive mosquito that's just really annoying and bitey called Aedes japonicus, the Japanese rock pool mosquito. And that one was introduced in like the 80s and 90s. These have not been here a long time. They're not like an established part of our ecosystem. We could eliminate them with limited repercussions, but there are also some people who have ethical concerns about that.
I have no ethical concerns with it.
Also, you need to be able to raise the mosquito for like hundreds of generations in captivity, and a lot of mosquitoes can't be. It's succeeded yet. There are very few mosquitoes that have been able to be put into colonies in raised for hundreds of generations.
So it's not that that there's concerns about doing it. It's that they haven't figured out how to actually make it work yet.
Yes, but it's also worth adding there are a lot of people who are opposed to it. The ones in Florida were met with huge resistance um, from people who are afraid of just calling them genetically modified mosquitoes, that it was going to start anew, like the beginning of
Right.
a horror movie. So there's big resistance to a lot of those kind of bigger, wide-ranging mosquito control efforts. And people are very against any sort of mosquito control, really. Um, when it comes to like mosquito spraying or in Delaware where it's really coastal and they have a lot of these like salt marsh mosquitoes and wetland mosquitoes, they often have to spray by airplane. People are very upset about that. So there's a lot of pushback to some of those bigger mosquito controls, which is why it's so important to be able to do stuff ourselves to dump out waterlogged containers and make sure that we're not harboring a lot of mosquitoes in our yards.
Okay, so you don't really see that going anywhere realistically in the near future, I guess.
I don't know. I think if mosquitoes get bad enough, people want solutions. And I think that's maybe what happened in Florida. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the status is of some of that.
All right, well, thank
Great
you.
question. Sure. And I also want to say I'm not perfect when it comes to keeping mosquitoes out of my yard. In my former apartment, I was like, where are all these mosquitoes coming from? And I went into my backyard and my roommate had these kayaks that were filled with water, and I was like, oh no, I'm the problem. So it's hard to dump out a kayak. They're heavy, especially when they're filled with water. So I'm not perfect either. I'm trying.
Well, Preston's dad, you might, Jackie has a question here because the birders are also concerned about this. Are you concerned about declining species of birds and bats that feed on the wing and depend on mosquitoes when applying the larvicide?
Um, Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, are we concerned about the declining
Oh,
species of
okay.
birds who feed on the wing if we're killing the larvae?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'm not a birder, and I think I need to read up more on it. But You know, a lot of these mosquito species that we're killing off are invasive. Um, and while birds might be using them, the risk to human health is really significant, especially with West Nile virus. And there are plenty of mosquitoes out there. We're never going to be able to reduce all the mosquitoes. We can really just knock them down in urban areas where we can really focus on them. But in farther outside urban areas, mosquitoes they're doing great. And even in our urban areas where we're treating them pretty heavily, they aren't they're not completely gone. There will always be some. We try to reduce them when they're at their peak abundance and when they're really positive with West Nile virus, which would be really bad for birds too, since West Nile virus can really harm birds. But yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to read more about that.
Is and again, you're targeting specific species, so it's not going after all of the other 90% of species of mosquitoes out there that are not causing harm.
Yeah, and we don't really do big like broadcast general sprays. Like we don't do like truck spray. We don't do that many truck sprays or aerial sprays. We're really just kind of on there on the ground treating these like mostly stormwater infrastructure um places that and tires. So we're doing it pretty specifically to target those mosquitoes that are invasive and are harmful to people. We're not going out and spraying like crazy. It's not good for the environment to just spray willy-nilly. And it's adult killing products, they're not specific. They'll kill any bug, or they'll usually kill any bug. That's why it's so important to target them when they're larvae, because we have products like those mosquito dunks that can really target them specifically and not kill other insects, which are important for the ecosystem.
Brings us to Susan's question. What is a good way to keep mosquitoes out of a pool that is not being used? Mosquito dunks or keep chlorine in the water even if it's not circulating?
Yeah, so chlorine will eventually burn off, and also it's expensive. Um, so keeping the pool chlorinated would keep mosquitoes out of it, but I don't know if that would be the strategy. I'd say if you can't drain a pool and you want to keep mosquitoes out of it, I would recommend throwing in some of those, like some sort of mosquito control product, like those dunks, for example, and you can find those at your hardware store. Um, yeah, I would recommend that. Also, pool covers, if they're fitted well, they'll keep mosquitoes out. We had a person with a backyard pool that was absolutely full of mosquitoes, and it was so algae filled. The pool water was actually green, and you couldn't see into it. It was opaque, and we asked them either drain the pool or get a cover for it, and they decided to drain it.
So Mike asks, oh no, sorry, yeah, Mike does. If you're dumping out the water and there are larvae and pupae in there, do they die on the ground or can they survive and finish their development?
They can't survive. They'll die on the ground. They can't really move well on dry surfaces, and they'll kind of just sit there. And they're very weak to heat and drying out, so they'll die pretty quickly.
And then which species did you show us that shot its head out? And is that video available?
Yes. Let me see. I can try to find it. Let me see. I'm gonna pull up Google and I can. So that's a species called Cerophora ciliata. It is the largest blood-feeding mosquito in North America, and it is. Let's see. We have them in Maryland. They like drainage. They like drainage ditches around agricultural fields. They're really prevalent in the eastern shore. I've never been bit by them. I've seen people get bit by them. It does not look like fun. They're huge. Um, I'm trying to remember what the name of this article was, and if I can find it. Um, Maybe I can do that right as it ends, or let's see. Oh, okay, wait, this might be it. Yeah, there we go. This was a lot of people wrote articles about it. Um, yeah, if you just look up cannibalistic mosquito videos, you'll find plenty of them. Was there another question? I saw a question about pitcher plant mosquitoes. I spent a lot of time.
Yeah, yeah. That's yeah, spends a lot of money canoeing in the New Jersey pine barrens, known for its carnivorous plants, especially pitcher plants. Is there probability of more disease there due to the parasitic mosquitoes?
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting question. Um, though probably not from those pitcher plant mosquitoes, probably from other mosquitoes. The pitcher plant mosquitoes aren't really known to carry or spread that many diseases to us. I know they can like they're in the lab, they've been competent for being able to pass on or at least take up different diseases, but in practice they're not very common. They're not like huge densities. Like you can only get really a few of them per pitcher plant, whereas like another mosquito species you could get like hundreds in like a tiny depression in the water or in the ground, sorry. And also, what's really crazy about those pitcher plant mosquitoes is that some of them don't feed on blood, and it's kind of regional. I can't remember which region it is, but in certain parts of their range, they don't feed on blood as adults. I think we might be in that range. Then in the southern US, southeastern US, they might feed on blood, but I don't actually remember. But that's something really weird going on with them. Maybe they're in the process of like speciating into different species, but something weird is going on there. So ultimately, you're probably at more risk from other mosquitoes, but keeping using repellent, wearing long baggy clothing, avoiding being out during dusk and dawn, those are all ways you can protect yourself from those other mosquitoes.
Hey, Phil, do you have a question? I see you unmuted.
Yeah, actually, the among the species that are carnivorous on other species of mosquitoes, have they ever been successfully used as biocontrol agents?
Hmm. That is a really good question. And I feel like I've heard people talking about using those elephant mosquitoes as biocontrol. The problem is, how do you breed them? How do you get them to survive in colony in the lab? I know there are some universities that just have a colony of those elephant mosquitoes, but mosquitoes are kind of, I guess with those bigger carnivorous ones, they might be hard to breed at scale, but that would be a really interesting one. And then you also come into like the time cost. Is it easier if you have a tire to drop a elephant mosquito egg in there, or is it easier just to pick it up and shake it out or throw it away? Um, I know we're not allowed to do this in Pennsylvania, but in Florida, they have these biocontrol. They use fish as biocontrol, these so-called mosquito fish in the genus Gambusia. They are
Mhm.
allowed to put those in like abandoned pools. We are very much not. They can be invasive. They're native to the U.S., but they can be invasive if introduced outside of their range. So we're not allowed to do that. But people have been using fish because you can breed them in really high numbers and then just kind of dispense them. I know they use them in Florida for big pools and big cisterns that can't be drained, but not in Pennsylvania. I don't know in Maryland if they're used. Although I've seen mosquito fish in the wild in Maryland, so maybe it's either their range or maybe they're getting introduced.
Thank you.
Well, and
Absolutely.
how successful have the bladder warts been?
I wish I'd read through the rest of that study. I read through the methods and I did not finish the study, but I feel like if I had to guess, I feel like not great because a lot of these mosquito habitats dry out and this is an aquatic plant. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to read more into it. I think if you search bladderwort as a biocontrol, maybe you can find more
Um,
information on it.
you, driving through driving through Baltimore, you'll see a whole bunch of tire shops where that are on the side of the road, and they'll change tires, and you have stacks of tires and piles of tires. Are they? Is there? Are those tires collecting? Could they be collecting water and be breeding grounds? And is there anything out to kind of educate the tire shops?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a huge trade of tires and used tires all over the place. That's actually one of the thoughts behind how tiger mosquitoes got to this country is through the trade of used tires. Same with the Japanese rockpool mosquito. Um, yeah, it's kind of it's. I don't want to give up, but it's very hard because if those tires sit there in the open for more than 9 days, mosquitoes are gonna start coming out of them. Those tiger mosquitoes develop really fast. And we get complaints about like tire shops and people who just have big piles of tires in their yards. And when it comes to a private business, it's kind of harder to enforce. So if there's tires are sitting there, yeah, they can be really bad. And I have mechanics in my family, and they talk about how bad the mosquitoes get behind their shop. It's very hard to treat tires too. You can like sprinkle stuff in them, but you're never going to get all the water in there. And it's very hard to dump out a tire too, as I found out. And you can't, these people want to sell their tires, so they're not going to drill into them. So yeah, it's very hard. We have not, it would be an interesting idea to talk to people who sell used tires and see if they'd be willing to cover them up with like a tarp or something. I've seen that. That would probably be a good way to do it to keep water out of them. But then I've also seen tarps weighed down with used tires, and then it shows you just uh, you haven't solved the problem at all.
I think anywhere where you have a pile of tires sitting out exposed to the weather, they're going to collect water. They're going to be mosquito breeding sites. And that jerk that had 250,000 of them piled up, they should have given him 45 years instead of 45 days.
There's a Democrat.
Yeah, that was a crazy amount of those weren't all there, by the way. I think they were like they were like he bought them and then he had to sell them. I'm trying to remember the details. He bought them and he had to sell them, and then he just couldn't like find anyone to sell them to, and he was like, "Oh, I'll just dump them all over the place." Um, but yeah, not a yeah, not a we would not like him in our in our organization.
Oh, Alan says maybe there's a Shark Tank invention out there. We need to get our thinking caps on. There's a problem, we can find a solution for it, and there we go. Are there any other questions for Ben tonight on the mosquitoes? This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's a very good talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Oh, somebody has their hand up. Who is that? Alan. Go ahead, Alan.
So I don't know if I missed it before, but my standard question, Ben, for everyone who speaks on Thursday is, how did you get interested in mosquitoes?
That's a really great question. I was thinking about adding some more on that, but I was scared that I was going to talk too much, so I wanted to keep it a little bit shorter. But basically, in college, I was really interested in entomology, and I was doing an entomology degree, and my interest kind of flip-flopped around a lot. I was first I worked in a lab that did little tiny fly biology and like taxonomy, so figuring out like describing new species. And then I was really interested in like wasp sociality, because it turns out these paper wasps have really complex, I describe it as like Game of Thrones social interactions. So I was really interested in that. And then I did a summer project where I helped out a master's student, and he was looking at kissing bugs, which are a blood feeder. And they can spread Chagas disease, although they don't really do it that much in the United States. And that really got me interested in like the biology of bloodsuckers. And I took a course on mosquito, or like I guess on public health, and it covered mosquitoes a lot. And when it came time to look at grad schools, I just was thinking, there are so many programs that do mosquito stuff compared to other fields of entomology. And I found out that there was a really good mosquito mosquito research going on at University of Maryland. I wanted to be, I liked University of Maryland. I wanted to go there, be close to family, and the program had some really cool research going on. And so I did that. And, once I've done a master's on mosquitoes, I learned so much about mosquitoes. I'm on this path. It's only going to keep going. And coming to the end of my master's, I had really it was really lab based, and I wanted a chance to get out in the field and talk to people about mosquitoes, help people lower their mosquito numbers around their houses, make an impact on public health. So I started looking for public health type jobs that could get me involved with mosquitoes. That's how it kind of went.
Thanks so much. I'm trying to think of a pun about being bitten by the mosquito.
Bitten by the mosquito bug. Yeah. Yeah, I've got mosquito fascination virus.
And I wanted to ask end on a question about, it seems like all of the photographs, if you're taking pictures, I said, what is the best way to take a picture of a mosquito? Because you showed that they're very beautiful and intricate and delicate, but it looks like you have to sit there and let the mosquitoes be feeding on you to get the best picture. Is that the technique that is most used?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just that's the easiest way to do it. I don't. I'd say don't do it like me. But basically, I'm in these. I like taking photos of all sorts of bugs, and I'm often out, and there's just a mosquito hovering around me, already trying to bite me. I'm like, okay, I'll take a picture of you. But yeah, in the United States, we have. It's not very common. It's rare, but we have mosquito-borne diseases we really don't want. So I think I don't let myself get bitten by mosquitoes that are really big at carrying diseases. I guess this kind of requires some, familiarity with the mosquitoes. So like I don't let myself get bitten by house mosquitoes typically. Only mosquitoes that I feel like probably don't have any diseases. Also earlier in the season when diseases are less common is probably better. But yeah, it's kind of I don't want to say it's a bad habit, but I'm hoping I have enough pictures of mosquitoes biting me that I can just kind of call it quits. There's a mosquito book with some really gorgeous photos out of Australia, and in the foreword they're like, don't do this. Don't let mosquitoes bite you. Um, the way to take photos of them, just you can create like some of my photos were on fake backgrounds where I built like a little got a little Tupperware, filled it full of like mud and sticks and stuff, and then I kind of trapped a mosquito under a jar and eventually kind of settled down and stopped moving. But you have a lot of trial and error, and then you have a mosquito in your house if it escapes. So you haven't, yeah, that has happened to me a few times. I'll admit more than a few times.
Well,
Um,
how do you get pictures of the adult mosquitoes that don't feed on humans?
Yeah, that's a great question. You just gotta let them tire themselves out on top of either like a white background or on dirt. But then they'll also fly off. That ornate treehole mosquito that I took a picture of, that was kind of an accident. I was home visiting my family and I found a big tree hole in their backyard and I got a turkey baster on my own. I didn't use my mother's. I got a big turkey baster and I drew up out all the water and that tree hole mosquito was in there with a bunch of the really, I didn't mention them too much, but another really bad mosquito in the United States is the eastern tree hole mosquito. And I think I got like 300 of those and one of the ornate tree hole mosquito in this tiny little tree hole, the size of like maybe it held like a liter of water. It was crazy how many mosquitoes were in there. Not my mom's turkey baster. I use my own turkey baster. I've got it around here somewhere. I would not be invited back.
All entomologists go around, have a turkey baster with them at all times. If they see a tree hole, they're going to go into it. That's what we've learned.
So I have
After
I have a mosquito joke, and that's nothing factual. This is just, in honor of my father who told this joke. Something about the female mosquito is the one that bites, but it doesn't make any noise, and the male mosquito doesn't bite, but it makes noise. So if you hear nothing, that was the joke.
Don't quit your day job, Alan. All right. Well,
It's an easy day job.
I'll always take any mosquito joke. My coworkers are more into the killing mosquitoes than I like to talk about mosquitoes with them. And kind of I'm doing this presentation in a more abstract format on them all the time.
I just have
well, we really.
I just have a quick question. Since you sometimes let mosquitoes bite you to take a picture, and like, does it not bother you as much since you've gotten bitten by them a lot, does it not bother you as much?
That's a really good question. So I didn't work in a lab like this, and I'm kind of thankful for it. But in some mosquito research labs, they keep mosquito species that feed really a lot on humans. And the cheapest and easiest way to keep those mosquito colonies alive is they stick their arm in and they feed on the grad students, or they put their elbow on top of the screen. Um, and they get fed on a lot. And sometimes in these people, they get habituated to the mosquito saliva, which is causing that reaction. And they don't have any reaction anymore. They don't itch anymore. And there's also natural variation in how much people itch to mosquito bites. Some people itch a lot more, and it may even seem that they're getting bitten more because they just have bigger and more reactions than other people. Some people don't even react to all bites.
So when I was a grad student at Cornell working on petunias genetics, and my husband was working on Drosophila, we always knew to hide when the mosquito people came down to look to see if anybody was ready to volunteer to feed the mosquitoes.
That's funny. They have volunteers from other labs. That's not even fair. You're not even getting to do the research on those mosquitoes.
Well, they were our friends, and they'd try to buy us off with like, "We'll take you out for beer. Come on, I'm so tired of doing this."
Yeah. I've thought about it doing like once or something for our colonies that we kept, but I was like, I saw the pictures of what it like the people's elbows look like sometimes after, and I was good. But yeah, to answer your question, Preston, I don't think I get bitten enough by mosquitoes to develop that. And I thought I was really like a magnet for mosquitoes, but then I started going out in really mosquito-y habitats with my coworkers, and they're getting bitten way more. So I may actually not be as attractive to mosquitoes as I once thought I was. Like that day we were in the swamp, I only got one bite somehow, and my coworkers were absolutely covered.
Well,
I've become less attractive as I've gotten older, not just to other humans, but also to mosquitoes, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
Sure.
I worked in the woods a lot in environmental science for many years. And one day, some of my colleagues mentioned that I was the only person in the woods that day that wasn't complaining about mosquitoes. And then I realized that because we got really filthy dirty, I didn't want to spend a lot of money on detergent for my work clothes every day because I had to wash a new set of clothes every day. So I went to Walmart and I bought the cheapest, crappiest detergent I could find. And I think it was like $1.88 a gallon or something. And somehow, when I washed my clothes in that detergent, which was perfumey, no mosquito came near me. I just thought that I'd share that with everybody. And it still works if you could stand the smell of those really cheap liquid detergents. And also, could we have your email? Because I have something I want to send you.
Absolutely. I just sent, I think this should work. I've made I have a mosquito outreach email. It's called I just put in the chat. I think that should work.
Okay, thank you.
If it doesn't, you could, yeah, I guess we could.
That's a great email, Seeking
Thank you.
Skeeters.
Yeah, I think it's with an S. Yeah, I think it's plural. Yeah, seekingskeeters@gmail.com. Yeah, always happy. I'm always happy to talk about them. I'll talk your ear off.
Well, this has been great, Ben, and I do want to, we'll check and see how we are in our mosquito collections, because maybe we can work together and do something fun with that as well. And thanks everybody for coming out for Must Learn Thursday. Next week it is the Sika deer. We're going to learn all about that. So I hope to see you back. And then following that is the orchids of Calvert County. So between now and then, stay well, stay curious, stay outside, and stay away from the mosquitoes, or go towards the mosquitoes because they're so cool. I don't know.
Appreciate them from afar. I don't be responsible for more bites.
thank you.
Right, get your turkey basters, everybody. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Thank you again.
Of course.
Good
Thank you
night.
for coming. Good night.